Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, November 17th. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Committee. We have one item on our agenda today, and that is Bill 2425, Transportation Demand Management Repeal. This is the second work session on this legislation that was introduced by the full committee, but led by Councilmember Balcom, and Councilmember Stewart is joining us virtually. And so before we jump into it, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Balcom for any additional comments.
Great, thank you. Just to set the stage, thank you, Chair Glass, for scheduling the follow-up so quickly after the last session. When we left the last session, we had a few outstanding items. Most importantly, whether the Planning Department had the authority to continue to use traffic mitigation plans as part of their conditional approval of development projects in regards to adequate public facilities requirements. And then also to clarify that the Council does not have the authority to terminate existing plans, and then to determine what would happen to the existing plans if this repeal goes forward. So we had several conversations with DOT, with planning, and I think we have those answers. So I want to thank Ms. McCartney-Green for really working through these issues. So that's it.
That's great. Thank you for bringing us up to speed, and I'll turn it over to Ms. McCartney-Green to walk us through the packet.
Good morning, Chair Glass. Good morning. And so looking at your packet on page 6, the issues for the committee's discussion is kind of centered around the first two issues that Councilmember Balcom raised, discussing the existing plans and then looking at the authority. And then there's two other technical conversations to have about a savings clause and the effective date, and we'll get to those. But looking on page 6, the first question was, what would happen to existing TMAGs and TDM plans if the law is repealed? And with conversations with DOT, with planning, and in your packet are letters from both departments as well. It's a complicated situation concerning the agreements. What we just discussed, that there are three-party agreements, and because of that, the county is not able to unilaterally back out of them. Instead, there's an uncodified part of the bill that talks about a transition portion. If an individual wanted to be released from the TMAGs, the best thing would be able to make a request for an amendment or a possible termination. However, that would have to go through a review process through both agencies to determine if that was, if they're eligible for that. And so really we're discussing not the law part of it, that is pretty clear, but we're discussing the transition phase if the law is repealed, if the TDM law is repealed, what would happen. And so I'm going to stop there and just talk about the existing three-party agreements. There are two-party agreements where it's more of a straightforward process, where the termination of that agreement is based on MCDOT and also looking at that. But let's talk about the TMAGs, and Chair, if you prefer to get the department's clarification too.
If anybody wants to weigh in now.
Sure. We did research TDM plans and TMAGs that we have available. Everything that we found were identifying that those plans were required of conditions of approval, and as Ms. McCartney-Green said, the majority of those are three-party agreements, meaning the Planning Department is a signatory of those agreements. The ones that are two-party agreements are still conditions of approval, so there would still need to be a planning board process for the vast majority of the plans we've identified that would modify the conditions of approval. So very likely there would need to be some substitute measure approved by the planning board or the planning department through an administrative procedure in order to release someone from that plan. But somebody could pursue that if they wished. So that was the basic finding of the research, and we had suggested that this direction that's in the uncodified section say that before anybody seeks the county to release the plan, they identify whether it's also a condition of approval, and if it is, to then first have that condition of approval released or modified before seeking to have the TDM plan or TMAG canceled. That's not the right word, but sunsetted.
Sunset's a good word. So for the three-party agreements, I I'm getting caught up in the fact that I understand the two-party agreements between MCDOT and the property owner, right? But when it comes to the planning board, because of the relationship, special relationship with the planning board and the council, where the council provides all the authority and the rules of engagement, usually through zoning and other responsibilities, why is it not that if the council makes a decision that the planning board would not conform to it?
For the record, David Ansbacher, Division Chief of the Transportation Planning Department. So the TMAGs and the TDM plans are conditions of development approvals. If a property owner seeks to terminate them, they have to go to the planning board with an amendment. The planning board would review the request against the current council-established growth and infrastructure policy, and property owners would receive some sort of credit against the constructed improvements and the payments that they have made. That would be the process. Since removing or eliminating a TDM agreement is likely to increase traffic, there could be more traffic on the road, and so applicants under the growth and infrastructure policy could be required to construct additional improvements or make additional payments.
I think it's conflating a few different things. There was a policy statement that was just made about what would happen if the TDM is repealed. My question is the apparent or appearance of complications and not being able to address it because of the three-party factor. What I'm trying to distill here is the working relationship, the regulatory relationship, the legal relationship between the council and the planning board, that if the council sets a new policy, why the planning board would not automatically conform to it.
The planning board would conform to it, but there's a council-established process that the planning board would have to go through, and that's an amendment to the preliminary plan following, again, the council's approved growth and infrastructure policy.
And Ms. McCartney-Green, is that not addressed in this?
Yeah, and so let's differentiate policy versus legal. And
Correct.
So the policy.
I think that's the conflation I referred to.
Yes, and so the policy point is clear that the council's intent here is to repeal it. But on the legal point of that, there are existing agreements that are recorded with some of these buildings, and in those agreements are packed in different conditions, and so that the council is not removing. So those legal contractual agreements with the developer have established whatever initiatives, whatever bench lines, and so with the three-party in it, even if a developer says, I don't want to be no longer locked into it, and the county no longer wants, planning still has their vested rights to be able to say, well, we're holding you to this because this is what we agreed to at the time that it was executed. And so the agreements fall outside of what we're looking at here from a policy point. Moving forward now, it'll look different, right? We won't have those anymore. And that was the next question. Does planning have its authority to be able to do that outside of having a law that's here? So from a policy standpoint, moving forward, we won't be able to do that, but with the existing agreements, and they're very different. From my understanding, I thought it was a one-size-fit-all. We just rescind them all, and that was a no because they looked a little bit different, and some of them are a little overly complicated. And so that's what falls outside of the policies, the contractual arrangements, and planning's authority to be able to enforce that against the developer separately from the council.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up as much as can be. Yes, complicated stuff. Councilman Rockham, were you going to say something?
Nothing on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can keep going.
And so just going to the actual language that the committee is looking at, bottom of page 6, also the top of page 7, there was existing language that we were working and kind of tinkering with. You know, Councilman Balcom had some suggestions. Councilman Balcom, I can point them out, or you can point them out. That's
I'll go.
okay. Cool, sure.
Yep. So this is an interesting. We had amendments introduced in the last work session, but we never voted on them. So these aren't amendments to an amendment. It's just part of. But because it's what we were working with, I just wanted to call a couple things out. One is that we're changing from 60 days to 90 days after the notice requirement, 90 days after the effective date, just to give more time for DOT to be able to send out that requirement. And then the other thing is we're asking DOT that they must provide notice to the responsible party. At the request of DOT, we're adding to the extent feasible because some of these are very old. They're not digitized. There may be change in, they're very likely change in the point of contact. So we're adding that extent feasible, changing written notice to notice, and then we also eliminated the department desires to terminate, just basically stating that due to the repeal, agreements may be eligible for termination. So the amendment that's in this packet on page 6 and 7 is the amendment that's on the table right now. But because it's different than the amendment that we proposed, that council staff proposed last time, I wanted to bring those out. So I support this amendment.
Thank you for working through that. I think that makes sense. I support it, and I see Councilmember Stewart nodding. So there you go, and the yes as well. So we'll accept that amendment. Before I move forward, I just want to go back to the point I raised before with Mr. Ansbacher. Regarding the TMAGs, and clearly I'm still trying to sort through this because it is complicated, but I think it is kind of at the heart of the matter. How many of these agreements currently exist?
It's in the neighborhood of 140 to 190.
140 to 190. Are they in varying levels of engagement, or how would you define the 140 to 190?
Well, as Ms. Balcom mentioned, there are some that are very old, and the records are in paper copy, and it's not clear that they're still active. So there are others that we have better information and are more actively being managed. Some of the ones that have been executed, some have been terminated already. And I think I can maybe provide a little bit of clarity on this. So the Chapter 42A section identified specific geographic areas of the county and the specific construct of a TDM program. So if you move forward with rescinding that, those things will go away. So there won't be an automatic trigger that you must have one of these because of the requirements of Chapter 42A. But if the planning department and working with DOT through the development review and approval process identifies that a transportation mitigation agreement or TDM plan could reduce other elements of mitigation a project needs to do or otherwise allow a project to be acceptable, that would still be possible. And of the agreements that currently exist, there are a number that are of that former variety that aren't in a transportation management district. Ms. Brecker mentioned last time the suburban hospital agreement. Suburban hospital is not in a transportation management district, was not required based on the law to enter into that program, but entered into that program as part of their development approvals to meet adequacy requirements. So those things would still be possible, and they could be possible anywhere in the county under the provisions of Chapter 50. And DOT is also charged with managing a transportation demand management program and initiatives through earlier sections of the county code that define the scope of the Department of Transportation. So it's still a thing. It still exists. It still could be applied. Sorry about that. I thought I silenced it, but that's the danger of having two. Still exists, still applies, but it does not apply in the rigorous manner that 42A does, where in specific areas of the county you must do this. So that's, I hope that clarifies a little bit. That's why it still exists but doesn't exist.
Yes, you explain the scope of the situation, right? Whether it clarifies is a second question, but you provided more context, so appreciate that, Director. I'm good there, so we'll go back.
Yeah, so that leads us to the next question is, if the county TDM program is repealed, does planning have the authority to require certain TDM mitigation initiatives as a conditional approval? And going through that process, we first looked at Chapter 50 just to see what the planning authority is there. And so looking at Section 53J4C, it does talk about, under certain criteria, the board could require or has the authority for traffic mitigation measures as necessary to ensure transportation facilities will be adequate to serve the subdivision and meet the transportation goals established by the master plan or the growth and infrastructure policy. That is sufficient for them to be able to implement. We did talk about maybe there are other terminologies that may need to be defined in Chapter 50 or Chapter 59. It's a little bit into zoning. I am going to leave that for my colleague, but there might be more discussion there. With that, it does, beg the question of just roles and responsibilities, because from my understanding, MCDOT was primarily the one reviewing and suggesting some of the initiatives here. If we're moving the bucket where planning is now the one triggering that process during the review, the question is whether or not there were sufficient resources there and whether or not they still needed collaboration with MCDOT. And so absent of a law, the MOU is also memorandum of understanding is a good alternative between departments, and so that may be one option. In terms of what authority does MCDOT have? Under the general role of DOT, their Chapter 255 talks about having the ability for transportation demand management. It doesn't go into very specific. It's very broad. So repealing Chapter 42 would take away the specifics, give planning under Chapter 50, I'm sorry, all the laws, but give planning authority under Chapter 50, and we can think about what that roles or responsibility would be between an MOU, but really want to leave it there and have any fill-ins for anything else that I may have missed.
Excuse me, Director.
Yeah, we've coordinated with our colleagues in planning on this and both agree that it would be useful to have some more clarity in the law as this repeal is considered by the committee and potentially passed by the council. And it suggested some language that's on Circle 76 of your packet that defines some very basic parameters of TDM plans and set forth the responsibilities of DOT to administer them if they're required by the planning department. This would negate the need for other negotiations or development of an MOU between the two agencies, which sounds simple, but it's just as complex, if not more complex, than the legislative process that we're in now. So if the committee had any interest in entertaining that language, I think both departments would recommend inserting that in section, in the current place that you're looking to repeal TDM.
Thank you. So I would, in talking with Ms. McCartney-Green, suggest that we don't amend this section, that if we were to codify the relationship between DOT and planning, we would do that in Chapter 2 and clarify that relationships in Chapter 2 and have the full repeal of this bill.
Ms. McCartney-Green, can you expand upon?
Yeah. And so right now, there's no amendment on the floor. Just want to clarify from procedural. Really, the conversation is if we're repealing the entire Chapter 42A, we should repeal that. If we think that we want to strengthen what the role is, I think we should keep it very general and broad because we don't know what that would look like. And so the recommendation here is to put that under Chapter 2, verse 55, if we think that there's a need to expand it. And I'll just read it for the record. It just says perform public transportation, energy, and operational functions, including transportation demand management programs. That's very broad. That gives a lot of flexibility. And so council staff believe that that was sufficient. But if the director is saying that that needs to be a little bit more, I would rather make an amendment there than to do anything else to Chapter 42A.
Appreciate both of those comments and clarifications. I'm getting caught up on Director Conklin's statement that an amendment, that the proposal that he put forth further complicates an already complicated law, if I understood that, or the repeal. You used the word complicated and said it further complicates it.
The repeal would still, of everything that's currently there, would still occur. So all of those complicated arrangements around transportation management districts red, green, yellow, 50 employees, various sizes of development would still be repealed. This would just simply state what a TDM plan is and what DOT's role in managing those plans are. Those plans would only be required if they're a condition of approval going forward for development. And what I mentioned is complicated is that negotiating MOUs between agencies is complicated. We get multiple attorneys involved, multiple staff involved, and what seems
It was
like
the negotiation that was
simple-
complicated, not the process.
what seem like simple elements end up getting more complicated than perhaps the legislative activity that we're already involved in.
Appreciate the clarification. Yeah.
I was just going to add one thing, which is really planning's to add, but they had mentioned that there may be a need to actually amend Chapter 50 and possibly also amending Chapter 2. I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Just to be frank, I'm not very familiar with Chapter 2, so this is a new proposal for us. In the absence of that, we were suggesting that amendments to Chapter 50 would be needed to, at a minimum, define transportation demand management, but also to talk about the roles and responsibilities. If this is in Chapter 2, that might change things for us.
And I would just say that Chapter 2 is broad in general. It is essentially defining the scope and organization of the Department of Transportation, not a specific details of a program area that this is.
I see Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure, so would it be possible, I know Director Conklin, you identified circle 76 is the amendment that Planning and Department of Transportation looked at. Originally, you were suggesting this would be in section 42. Is it possible to take some of this language and put it in either chapter 2 and or chapter 50? Because I think the piece, if I'm looking at the correct section, particularly the definitions and then the TDM plan contents and approval, if Councilmember Malcolm agreed, it's still broad enough that at least defines what we're talking about. So I just want to make sure I was following the recommendation here. And if we could take what you originally recommended in section 42A, which we're repealing, and could some of this language be in chapter 2 or chapter 50, or both?
So let me kind of back up here. And I'm going to answer your question, Councilmember Stewart. Also, I'm going to try to clarify as well. The proposal here on page 76 goes through not only the definition, but the contents of the plan, the approval, and the enforcement. From my understanding, repealing the TDM removes that altogether. Now, if MCDOT is saying to work with planning, we would like a little bit more clarity, I'm happy to expound on that in chapter 2 to discuss a little bit about the role. But that wouldn't go necessarily into the contents, the enforcement, and the plan details. And so just wanted to clarify that it would expand and give broad language, specifically dictating what the working relationship should be with planning. But that's very broad. It's not as detailed as what you're seeing here in 76. Separately, for zoning and from a planning perspective, Chapter 50 may need to be amended just for definitional purposes to expand that. That still would occur. I put a caveat there because I'm not the zoning attorney, but that's my belief there. And so just to summarize, what's on page 76, the amendments that are being proposed here, I would not suggest the entirety be put in Chapter 2. What I would suggest is some language that shows the forging of collaboration and coordination around TDM, and a little bit explaining what DOT role is. So that's what the recommendation from council staff. Just for what we're looking at, there is no amendment per se from council staff that's here to define what that would be.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Councilmember Malcolm, Nope. Okay. No amendment on the floor. Continued conversation. You want to keep walking us through?
I'm trying my hardest not to make this complicated. Trying to
it-
mitigate the traffic here.
Well played.
All right, page 8 of the staff report. Sorry.
We didn't do on page 7, the amendment or termination request. There was two pieces of that amendment.
Oh, my apologies. And so this was a section A of the uncodified section, and then there's a section B. And section B really just clarifies that it can either be an amendment or a termination request. And if there's a plan or agreement that was required as a conditional approval established through this three-party agreement, then the termination must be executed or released by all parties. And it's really just clarifying that no single party can terminate that agreement.
You keep going. Yep.
Okay, so on page 8, number 3, Planning Department raised in their letter a provision to include in the bill that would express the council's intent to preserve the planning's authority despite the repeal. In legal terms, it's considered a savings clause. It's also a part of an uncodified section. Specifically, it would the savings clause is used to protect authorities or actions from being invalidated because it's repeal. It basically preserves the Planning Board's authority granted elsewhere, which would be in Chapter 50 or 59. And so the language here is, nothing in this act must be construed to limit, impair, or repeal the authority of the Planning Board under Chapters 50 or 59 of the County Code to impose transportation demand management measures, transportation management agreements, or any other related agreements or plan as a part of the Planning Board regulatory authority.
Agree.
Agreed. And Councilmember Stewart agrees. Yes.
Okay. Lastly was the effective date. Currently, what's drafted in the bill that was introduced had a December 31st, 2025. By the time we blink, that will be here. And so I'm not sure if there were amendments either Councilman Balcom or DOT wanted to raise about moving that effective date.
Yes, we had a conversation with DOT, and for many reasons, it makes sense to move it to July 1st, 2026. I don't know if Director Conklin wanted to add.
Yeah, if you could expand
The
upon
reasons are principally fiscal, in that the current budget is developed and relied upon, and bills have been issued for fees, and if fees are eliminated, that should occur at the beginning of the subsequent fiscal year.
that. So start of the next fiscal year, for clarity. Okay. That makes sense. Councilmember Stewart? Yep.
Yep.
I just had a technical amendment that I know DOT staff had raised, that the biennial report that's usually due in the packet says December 1st, 2025. It would actually be December 1st, 2026. I just wanted to clarify that in the background section of the packet.
That's the report.
Yes, the report.
Yes. Without objection.
All right, Ms. McCartney-Green, can I also make another technical clarification that the packet may reference employer TDM fees, but it's only developer TDM fees? Thank you.
So make that correction throughout, or you're just referencing the packet, not the legislation?
Correct, just the packet.
Okay, very good. And that is it. Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. I know that this was very complicated, and it's taken a long time, and for good cause. I mean, we had to go through a lot on this, but I think it's very important just to reiterate that the repeal of the law does not diminish the purpose of transportation demand management, and that most of the critical components will stay in place. We still have non-auto driver mode share goals. And those goals are throughout in various places in master plans and certainly the growth policy. And we should have contact with employers. Employers want to help employees navigate commutes, and DOT's done a great job of having those relationships with the employers. That's not going to go away. And as we've established, it's important that the planning board still have the authority to have these relationships with developers to create traffic mitigation plans as part of the adequate public facilities process. And so all of these things remain in place, and it's important to our climate goals, it's important to our transportation goals, that we continue to have transportation demand management. And I think that repealing this law, the existing TDM law, doesn't negate the importance of all of those goals. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Councilmember Stewart, do you have any?
No, I just want to thank Councilmember Balcom, also our Department of Transportation and the Planning Department, as well as Ms. McCartney Green in working on this. And I just want to really endorse everything that Councilmember Balcom just said. Our goals stay the same, and we're going to continue working on this. And what we're doing today is really fixing that, the mechanism by which we were trying to achieve our goals wasn't really working the way we had hoped it would. And I think we're keeping those goals in mind and continuing to work on them. And I really appreciate everyone's hard work on this and continued partnership.
Thank you. And later today you'll be going down to DC to talk about commuting goals for the entire region, which is part of this discussion, recognizing that we want people to safely and efficiently get around not only Montgomery County but the DMV. And you'll be going to DMV Moves, and I'll be participating virtually to make sure that we have an well-operating metro system, right, which is another part of the component here. And I'll say thank you to Councilmember Balcom, who brought this, I'll say, labor of love to the council with her, and it has taken a while to work through because it's complicated. And I think what this process has shown is that there are policies that we have put in place over the last number of decades with very good intention, but just need some updating and modernizing for the year 2025 that we're in and thereafter. And it might prove difficult to untangle the actual regulation or policy, but the goal absolutely remains important, and there are other ways of tackling that. And that is what we've worked through today, and that is what our public transportation network and our sidewalk and bicycle infrastructure network and the CIP that will be coming out on January 15th with other transportation projects that meet our residential needs, meet our employer needs, and generally get people moving throughout our community. That is the commonality between all of these. It goes across the planning board, across the Department of Transportation, and certainly into our private sector. So appreciate you digging in. We got here. I appreciate all of you working through this, because again, it is difficult. Thank you, Ms. McCartney Green. And let's just take a formal vote. All those in support of this Bill 2425 as amended, and that is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.